My journey with CDD started some 25 years ago, right at the beginning of when it was established. I was on the first board. I had gotten to know some of the founding directors, Professor Jima Buedi, Professor Bafwa Jimandria, as colleagues who I had encountered at the first think tank in Ghana, which was IEA. And I've watched CDD just grow over the years in stature, in influence, in terms of staffing. There were just a few staff members, a few programs, but a clear vision and mission to intervene in the governance space, to help to contribute in the deepening of our new democracy. Today, I would say CDD is considered as the foremost think tank on governance issues in Ghana. There are others, even the ones that may have been founded just around the time of CDD or perhaps earlier, are not as prominent as CDD is now, and I'm very proud of that. CDD has really been at the forefront of many governance issues. One of the clearest ways in which CDD started to intervene right from the beginning is to make sure that there would be quality electoral democracy, which meant that we needed to keep an eye on elections and the quality of elections. And of course, one of the most significant contributions of CDD in that space, amongst many contributions, is the setting up of CODEO. It's a coalition of domestic election observers headed by two eminent Ghanaians at the beginning, Justice VCRAC Crab and Professor Miranda Greenstreet. And they have been able to preside and chair over CODEO in a very credible manner. It's hard to imagine elections today in Ghana without CODEO. Everybody has come to expect that CODEO will be there to observe the elections, to pronounce on it. Then, of course, Afrobarometer has been a major contribution derived from CDD. There'd be no Afrobarometer if there'd been no CDD-Ghana. And Afrobarometer, as you know, is a public opinion polling instrument where it takes the pulse of ordinary people around Africa. Some 38 countries already and growing, aiming for 40 countries, where it takes the pulse of ordinary people on issues that matter to them, service provision, governance issues. And in that way, it informs public policy. But it's also a very important data set for researchers and academics who are writing on issues relating to governance and service provision. So we can't overemphasize the importance of Afrobarometer. One of the things that CDD did in the beginning, it sort of discontinued it, but plans to come back to it, is Democracy Watch. And Democracy Watch was a regular publication that functioned as a space for thought pieces on issues on democracy that were happening. It allowed CDD also to flag governance misbehaviors as well. CDD sends election observers or expertise to other African countries or who need help with their elections. West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, is another example of the kinds of coalitions that CDD builds, not just locally, but on the continent, because WADEMOS is West Africa, bringing together different organizations to work on issues relating to democracy. And so in that sense, when you build coalitions, you join up actions, it's much more powerful, it has much more influence, it brings about, the possibilities that it will bring about change are even greater. A Corruption Watch is another example of a CDD-led initiative in conjunction with GII that kept an eye on corruption and reported on corruption. But there's a lot of other advocacy issues. For example, CDD was influential in strengthening the position of the Auditor General and continues to advocate for independence of the Auditor General so that power can be held accountable. That's very important in a democracy. The center has not been without some controversy, particularly when research comes out that upsets certain institutions, certain political parties. They tend to pronounce a fatwa on us. But I always say that I'm proud that when they are not bearing the brunt of the research, they like to quote CDD. Part of the reason that can happen is that CDD remains non-partisan, non-biased, and tries as much as possible to be inclusive in all of its programs, no matter what. There's a very strong ethos of integrity that guides CDD. It's important that CDD remains credible, and I think is so far so good. I think when you ask the public, not only is CDD known and visible, but there's a recognition of what it contributes to the governance landscape, and there's a recognition that it is a credible, non-governmental institution. CDD has come a long, long way this past 25 years. Our footprints are felt all over the country. We have an office in the northern region, but we have operations in many more regions across Ghana. As we journey on, I'd like CDD to continue being true to its mission. That mission is to deepen democratic consolidation in Ghana. The mission also is to ensure that we have good governance in the country. And importantly also, we should have inclusive growth in our development. We need to pay attention to the marginalized people in this country, make sure that their rights are protected, their voices are heard, and their situations are made much better. And so we need strong institutions like CDD to ensure that we keep the pressure on duty bearers to do the right thing, because democracy, as we can see, is fragile. And in order that we make sure that we don't go back to the dark old days, we will need to be sure that CDD continues informing, educating, advocating in the governance and democracy space. Civil society is indispensable in any democratic arrangement, but particularly in the developing nation context, we need civil society organizations. Looking forward in 25 years, I wouldn't say I want to see more civil society organizations, because quantity is not always quality. It will be important for us to be able to grow relevant, strong civil society organizations that can elicit responsiveness from governments, from duty bearers. That's really important. We can try and hold people accountable and you can do it, but it matters more that you are able to do it in ways that get them to respond appropriately, so that ultimately we bring about change. One of the things that I have been most proud of is to see the staff at CDD grow, not just in numbers. There were just a few people when CDD started. Now the staffing situation is 50 plus people, some of them not located in Accra, but also to see the value that is added once they join CDD. Over these 25 years, I think CDD has demonstrated its worth. We've been able to identify and work with integrity with many donors, many stakeholders. We've come to be trusted. We intend to continue to work with all of our donors and stakeholders, and to make sure that our relationship with them is mutually beneficial. It's important that people have experiences with CDD that they find positive, and that keeps them coming back to work with us. I trust that that's the situation right now, and 25 years more down the line, that would be the situation. I'd like to wish CDD a happy silver anniversary. 25 years is short, but it's also long in the lifespan of an organization. It's a significant milestone that I pray we will continue to add to in the coming years.
Over the past 25 years, CDD-Ghana has struck remarkable wins in the democracy and governance landscape in Ghana and on the continent. From empowering ordinary citizens through data-driven research to safeguarding electoral integrity, championing transparency and accountability, and advocating for inclusive development, the center's journey has been defined by impactful initiatives and steadfast dedication. Now, to celebrate our 25th anniversary, we embarked on an outreach program in 3 regions across the country. The goal of the outreach program was to provide our stakeholders a platform to assess our works and receive feedback. Now, in this short summary video, we talked to some beneficiaries of CDD-led initiatives and what was gathered from the outreach. First, our research analyst, Gilfred Esiama, who led the team on the Western Regional Outreach, gave highlights of what was gathered.
At the engagement, we got to know from them the things that we've been doing well, some of the gaps that we have over the past 25 years. And also to satisfy their curiosity about the way we operate as an organization. So on the things that people want to see us doing better, it's around our advocacy. They want to see CDD-Ghana more vociferous on the issues that come up in the country, especially issues around economic governance, economic mismanagement. Again, people are also expecting, or they've been expecting CDD-Ghana to consistently be promoting and championing local government or local governance. We got to know that when it comes to the practice of local government, it is very weak at the local level. Again, they also want to see CDD-Ghana championing the election of MMDC that was promised by this government. We also got to know that people are also more interested in CDD-Ghana taking up the inclusiveness agenda and then promoting the rights of persons living with disability. So these are things that people felt we haven't been doing much, and they want to see us doing better.
Very insightful feedback from the Western region. Now, let's move the train to the Ashanti region, where Paul Osei-Kufuor led a team on the outreach.
when we had the conversations, it came out strongly that a lot of the stakeholders really appreciate what we do as a center, especially the kind of knowledge products and evidence that we produce. They specifically mentioned our work around Afrobarometer. They also spoke about our election work. And for election, one of the key points had to do with CODIO. They were very clear about what they want CDD to do. They want us to connect strongly with the grassroots. They think that our work, much as it's decentralized, there is still a lot of openings and spaces for us to connect strongly with local actors, the various citizen groups at the local level. You can mention the substructures, the area councils, the urban councils, especially where citizens really operate their day-to-day living and where livelihoods can be meaningfully impacted. That is at the community level. So they want us to interrogate policies and programs deployed by government that seeks to benefit communities and localities. Another major recommendation had to do with how we enhance inclusion for young people. They think that CDD must diversify strongly our actors and players that we engage at all levels. So we should have a strong and a very robust program that will engage young people over a long period of time in a very strategic, coordinated way. Then the last one also was about it's also about diversity, how we bring on board our audience and stakeholders who are not used to the Queen's language, and basically how do we embed strongly local languages in our programs and activities.
Well, you heard it all from the Ashanti region. Now let's move all the way up north, where Mavis Zubok, Domain Research Analyst, and Dr. Edem Selumi, Director of Research, led the team to meet the Tamale stakeholders.
The Tamale engagement, which forms part of our 25th anniversary engagement with stakeholders across the country, has been great. It was great. It brought together stakeholders across civic space, media, individuals, youth, women, campaign financing. They felt that that area have not been regulated and have brought a lot of issues, and so CDD should champion work around regulating campaign financing in the country. The other issue that particularly from the youth and the women that they wanted to see CDD doing more on is the issue of their involvement in civic space. We want to see CDD working more around championing and advocating and promoting women and youth engagement in civic spaces. People really spoke their mind on issues and CDD's work. It was really great hearing from people, me working at CDD, some of the things they were saying, I was surprised, because in as much as you measure your impact, it is good hearing from the people you work with, have engaged with in one way or another, what they think your impact have been. It wasn't business as usual. It's not because they came for a training program, and it is not because we are collaborating with them to carry out a project or an activity, but just having feedback from them. It was really revealing that what they thought CDD can do, the power that CDD have to impact on democracy and governance. It's great knowing the amount of trust that people have in you, the amount of confidence that people have in you to do certain things.
Now you heard it from the team leads. Is 10 of the beneficiaries of CDD-led initiatives. This was what they had to say.
CDD has done so well over the years. Even today, I've gotten to know that some of the very important activities that are associated with our democratic practice are being sponsored or initiated by CDD-Ghana. As for the Afrobarometer data, I am aware of it. Some of us in academia have made use of it. I have done about 2 or 3 papers in relation to that. That's a very useful data set. Then I didn't know it was CDD that also sponsored activities of CODEO and then the district league table. These are very important activities in our democratic dispensation.
I've worked with CDD for a very long time, at least for the past 20 years, with Professor Jima Boedi and later on Mr. Paul. All CDD programs, I was involved because the palace was involved. Professor Jima Boedi even came to the palace, and his interactions with the chief at that time was very cordial. And I think that relationship has grown to today. And from sitting outside and hearing what CDD does, especially in our local governance system of the country, is par excellent. And I would entreat them, to do more engagement with stakeholders, especially with the traditional authorities.
When you go to Terminal 3 of KIA, you would get to know that young people have lost confidence in our democracy because they want to leave the shores of Ghana. And it is as a result of our inability to consolidate the democracy that was birthed in the 1990s. CDD is actually doing a great job in this regard because it's actually trying to instill in us the values of democracy, and as young people, we are ever ready to embrace it.
As a person with disability, I did participate in many of CDD's work in terms of CODEO's work monitoring elections. I did participate together with some of the disabled people in the northern region as well as other parts of the country in CDD's research on Afrobarometer and other research work, where we look at security-civilian relation. People with disability did participate, and I, as a person, I participated. So CDD in its work as a totality or as a whole is very inclusive. As today, the program, they did invite us, and we have participated and we did contribute. They could have left us out, but looking at where we come from, there is more information where they could get from us. That's why they included us.
I joined the center at CDD-Ghana on the 5th of January 2001. And I came here as a cleaner. I was changed to be in charge of
to introduce tonight. Thank you.
For democratic development, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our 18th annual and Silver Jubilee anniversary edition of Kronti Akwamu public lecture. Before I say more, may I invite you to join us to observe a 1 minute silence in remembrance of a very good friend, long-standing friend of the center, who passed on recently, lawyer Anthony Akotampao. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you for making time to join us at this year's Kronti Akwamu lecture series. Launched in March 2005, the Kronti Akwamu lecture is CDD-Ghana's flagship public lecture on democracy, governance, and development. It is delivered annually by a local or international public figure, scholar, or practitioner whose work reflects an enduring engagement with and commitment to democracy, good governance, and inclusive growth and development, these being the three interrelated ideals that define the mission and inform the programs of CDD-Ghana. Through the Kronti Akwamu lecture, CDD-Ghana aims to elevate and invigorate the public conversation, provoke critical thought and reflection, and inspire fresh insights and perspectives on the experience, practice, and prospects of democracy, governance, and development in Ghana and the rest of Africa. We have drawn our speakers in the past from both the local and the international democracy community. Locally, we have had in the past figures like Dr. K.Y. Amwakon, former head of Economic Commission for Africa and founder president of Africa Center for Economic Transformation. We've had our very own Professor E. Jima-Buedi, the late Right Honorable Peter Alajete, former Speaker of Parliament. We have had Mr. Bernard Avle, Mr. Kweku Bakun, Professor Emeritus Techua Menu, and the late Mr. Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General. From the international community, we have had the privilege of having as our Kronti Akwamu lecturers Professor Larry Diamond of Stanford University and of the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, D.C., BC Adeleye Fayemi, Executive Director of Africa Women Development Fund, Dr. Jendai Fraser, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, and many others. This year, as my colleague Dr. Kojo Asante hinted, we have a Kronti Akwamu lecture with a twist. And the twist is necessitated by the fact that this is a special year for CDD. We were founded in 1998, which makes this year our 25th or Silver Jubilee anniversary. And we thought, in light of that, we would dedicate this year's lecture to, not to CDD as such, not to be self-congratulatory in that sense, but to, in a sense, reflect on the journey that CDD has taken with the Fourth Republic in these 25 years. We came on the scene in the very early trying years of the Fourth Republic, one might add, and we think that this presents us an opportunity to have some reflection to also inform the way forward into the future. So what we have done is draw on some of our own resources, those who have been part of this journey for the last 25 years. And to anchor this conversation would be Professor Bafo Ajimendia, who is co-founder, and with Professor Jima Buedi, co-founder of CDD-Ghana, and was our first associate executive director of the center. He will be introduced in due course by our moderator. So Professor Bafo Ajimendia will then be joined by other, I would call, alumni, friends, and insiders of CDD, who will all share their reflections after his main remarks. To moderate and oversee proceedings today, we have the pleasure of one of the leading civil society actors, not just in Ghana, but in our region. And in fact, the organization that she leads operates a lot more in the regional civil society space. So if you are like us, if you are like CDD, a player on that landscape, then you would be familiar with her work. Our moderator for today is Nana Afajeno. Nana is the Executive Director of the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI. She has worked with and within the civil society sector for over 24 years. Nana is a passionate advocate for sustainable development in Africa with the full participation of an effective, efficient, influential, and sustainable civil society. And the organization that she leads plays a very big and leading role in ensuring just that. WACSI serves as a major resource for civil society in the West Africa region. Nana is a lawyer by profession and has worked on areas of governance, human rights, philanthropy, and capacity development with several mission-oriented organizations in Africa, including the Africa Commission on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights, Open Society Initiative for West Africa, OSIWA, and ABIS West Africa, among others. Nana has also served on a number of public service boards, corporate boards, and non-profit boards, including the African Development Bank CSO Committee, Yali West Africa, and the Star Ghana Foundation Board. She is also a trustee of Oxfam UK, a board member of the Resource Alliance, and a member of the Advisory Council of the SDG Philanthropy Forum in Ghana. As you can tell from her short bio, civil society is written all over it, and it's not just locally, but also regionally. Nana is an alumna of the University of Ghana, Faculty of Law, the Ghana School of Law, the Columbia University Human Rights Advocates Program, and New York University School of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of inviting Nana Afajenu to take her position here so I can retire to my seat and hand over proceedings to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. CDD Aiko. I was telling Prof. Jima-Boadi, Prof. Kajekpo, and others that in 98, when CDD was starting, was when I was also cutting my teeth in civil society. I think those were the golden years of Ghana's democracy, and actually for civil society, because it was around that time that we had several NGOs, coming up, and it would be great to hear from CDD, from Prof. Bafo Agyeman-Duah, and our esteemed panelists today, how CDD has traveled this path so far. Because clearly in a dispensation like ours, in a country like ours where pigeonholing when you are working on democracy is something that is done all the time. You're either NC or MPP, it doesn't matter. As soon as you open your mouth, you are put into one of the pigeonholes. For an organization like yours to come this way, this far, there's something that you've done right. And it would be good to hear what it is that you have done. The visionary leaders, Prof. Jima-Boadi, Prof. Bafo Agyeman-Duah, who started this organization, had something special in mind. And today, it is our privilege, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to hear what it is, what is in the soup. I think that we used to have something, one advert, there's something in the soup. What is that thing in the soup that has brought CDD this far? And I'm sure there are many of us here who have been touched one way or the other by CDD and the work that CDD has done in this country. Last year, I was with Oxfam GB when they celebrated their 80 years anniversary. And I was asking myself, I remember, why is it that many of our organizations are not able to make it that far? And it is my hope that CDD would make it that far and even go beyond. But it does take something to get there. And I believe that part of those things that, they have been doing that took them, to that level where they got to 80 years is something that you've already started doing. And it will be great to hear that this evening. And also the challenges that you have gone through for us to learn from the lessons that you have learned. And that's why it is my greatest privilege this evening to introduce our main speaker for today's event, Professor Bafo Agyeman-Duah. He's currently the CEO of the John Agyekum Kufuor Foundation in Ghana. He served with the United Nations for 10 years, from 2005 to 2014, as Senior Governance Advisor with UNDP Tanzania and UN MIL Liberia. Earlier, he was Associate Executive Director of Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD-Ghana, which he co-founded in 1998. He's a Fulbright professor at the Legon Center for International Affairs, University of Ghana. He taught African politics at Bennett College and at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, USA, between 1985 and 1994. And he's published monographs and a number of articles in scholarly journals. His authored books include The United States and Ethiopia, Military Assistance and the Quest for Security, 1994, Civil Military Relations in Ghana's Fourth Republic, which was published in 2001, Ghana, Governance in the Fourth Republic, 2008, it was published, and my Ghanaian Odyssey, 2012. Prof, I think you should have brought some of your books for us to buy. He studied at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana, Ohio University, Athens, and the University of Denver, Colorado, USA, where he earned the PhD degree. It is my singular honor and privilege to welcome Prof. Bafo Agyeman-Duah to give his response at this time. Prof.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My response is simple. I'm delighted to accept the invitation to be the main speaker today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Short and simple. And so, like it is our tradition, we have to hear the spoken word. I'll now like to invite Chief Mumin to give us the spoken word.
We are caught between the hope of a new dawn and the shadows of a haunted past. Light beckons at the tunnel's end, yet darkness holds onto our backs. We stand at the threshold of soaring dreams, but we are crippled by the weight of painful nightmares. But we choose the hope of a new dawn, the lights at the tunnel's end, the soaring dreams at the threshold. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And it is my honor to contribute a few words by way of performance poetry to mark today's very important occasion. From the anthology of a great literary genius with many gems to share across varied subjects, a true colossus whose words will echo across generations. No, I'm not referring to Shakespeare or Soyinka or Wusonu, but one Fosu, Emeritus Charles Fosu, Charles Kojo Fosu, a.k.a. Daji Lumba. From his 2008 album, Sika, track number 6, Impim Domi. And I quote, Sempim pim tamio, pim pim echirimio, pim pim tamio, pim pim enodomio. Please forgive my rather atrocious attempt to channel the musical excellence of this great high life master. Nonetheless, it's the words that matter. Say pim pim edomia, pim pim, say pim pim etamia, pim pim edomi. To wit, if 1,000 people hate me, 1,000 people love me. There is a deep philosophy behind this rather simple aphorism that can be contextualized in various settings and interpreted in various ways, but at the heart of all interpretation is the idea of balance, the need for balancing perspectives to drive inclusive progress. Within the Ghanaian political context, John Mahama can very well sing Mpim Pim Domia, Mpim Pim Tami. And Baumia can also sing Mpim Pim Domia, Mpim Pim Tami. Because 4 million people roughly support the NDC, 4 million people roughly support the NPP. So in a sense, it balances out. This had led to the analysis that Ghana is a duopoly of two political parties. But the truth is a duopoly is nothing but a monopoly of the two. And the monopoly of the two does not create adequate balance for inclusive progress. So you need a true counteracting third force, not in the sense that you may be thinking. So today, I propose a remix of Daddy Lumba's iconic song. And this is the remix. And pardon again my interpretation of the Twi language, as I am of northern extraction. Se mpimpim etanwa, na se mpimpim edowa, enye uhia bako ana mienu bia omon tao, omon do, ombetimi ahwe wenim eka ne kware achiraw. To wit, If 1,000 people hate you and 1,000 people love you, you need that neutral balance. Those who neither love nor hate, who can look you in the eye and tell you the truth. And within this current democratic dispensation, that is the important role I see a civil society organization like CDD playing. That in a country where views are overwhelmingly to both political parties, you need that middle ground. You need that critical perspective that stands true and that stands the testament of time to provide balanced perspective of our progress, of our democracy, that would inform the march forward of this country. And so today, as we celebrate CDD, we also celebrate all of those within the civil society role who play such a critical role in ensuring that we always uphold balancing views, balancing perspective to drive our progress. That Bako or that Mienu who neither town or neither hate you or love you, but will always be there to provide critical balancing perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Mumin. Another round of applause for him, please. And still continuing in the spirit of our oral tradition, we would like to invite Hewale Sounds, this time to speak to us, not through poetry, but through music. Hewale Sounds, please. Can we have an interpretation, please? What does it mean? I'm called Afajinu. Don't let it confuse you. I'm still learning. Ghana Nigba. Anybody please help us those of us who want to understand the land of Ghana, Mau, God should bless Ghana. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ewale Sounds. Thank you very much. So I would like now to invite back to the stage our main speaker for today, Professor Bafo Ajimandria, to deliver his lecture. Prof.
I have to really thank CDD for the honor to be invited as the main speaker for the Kronti Akwamu. It's a creation from the very fertile mind of my brother co-founder, Professor Jima Buedi. I remember the discussions on this and choosing the name Kronti and Akwamu and whether it will stick or whether it will be fully accepted, it will give meaning to what we wanted to do. And today, I think Kronti and Akwamu has established itself as a very powerful platform for people to express their views about our country. So I thank CDD very much for this. Actually, I was told that to be a conversation, but people who are not very erudite can stumble in conversations. So I have a few words here, and the 30 minutes I have, I will try to share with you. So I have to begin by saying that my remarks tonight is guided by a title of a book and a conversation, a quotation, both of which I find very instructive and apt for the subject of discussion. I cite these two items as introduction to my remarks. And this is a long introduction because this is something I thought I should share with you. In 1993, John Donne published his edited book titled Democracy, The Unfinished Journey from 500 BC to 1993. It's 30 years since this book was published, and that really reminded me of Ghana's own journey, which began some 30 years ago with the Fourth Republic. The conclusion of this collection, this book, is that the democracy journey never ends. So I say that if the 2,500-year-old ancient Athenian experiment is still work in progress, then Ghanaians have indeed a very long way to go in getting traction for the 30-year-old experiment. Celebrating its silver jubilee this year, the CDD was founded in 1998 to advance democratic governance in Ghana, has journeyed 25 years along with the Republic. So I have to take this opportunity to wish the center a happy anniversary. But I also remind Executive Director Professor Prempe and the staff of John Donne's conclusion and say your job as CDD will never end. Now to the quotation. Some 6 decades ago, the two-time British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, in one of his rambunctious addresses, stated profoundly, and I quote, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for every other form of government," end of quote. So is Churchill challenging us to either learn to live with this worst form of government or seek an alternative, a better one, if any, indeed exists? I'm sure my friends at CDD and all others unhappy with Ghana's democracy will want to ponder these questions. So taking Dan's book title and Churchill's wisecrack together, we learn why democracy will forever be a challenge for societies that practice it. Obviously, embarking on the endless democratic journey that is never a blacktop requires a constant search for bettering this worst form of government. But to appreciate how to better democracy, it must be conceptualized as a two-sided proposition. One side embeds the lofty ideals of freedom, liberty, justice, inclusiveness, equality, and so on. Is the embodiment of liberalism, almost cast in stone in my view, and is called principled democracy. All members of a political community, that's a polity, irrespective of race, geography, or status, are entitled to these values. These entitlements are the essence of humanity. They differentiate humans from animals. They are values that draw the line between democracy and what Churchill calls every other form of government. Practice democracy is the other side of the democratic coin. And this refers to how, through institutions and systems, polities or societies actualize the tenets or principles, and how, through human agency, they become functional. To be meaningful and effective, I think it is imperative for the institutions and systems to reflect the society's history, culture, traditions, and other environmental factors. Significantly, this imperative instructs that practice democracy is not a straitjacket, not one size fits all. Because it is context-based, practice democracy requires the adaptation of institutions and systems to local realities. It should depend to a large extent on the peculiar circumstances of the polity. It should be localized. More often than not, the local context requires the society to address what I call the foundational issues or the practical questions of nationhood prior to creating the structures and systems of governance. The intellectual debate preceding the drafting of the American Constitution presents a good example of how foundational issues are addressed. Overlooking or ignoring such issues, the future of the new nation could be rocky and even conflicted. I'm not certain of the extent to which Ghanaians faced and addressed their foundational or practical issues towards the drafting of the 1992 Constitution that created the Fourth Republic. So herein lies the challenge of practice democracy. How to deal with the two hows, referring one to the aptness or relevance of institutions and systems, and two, the capacity of the human agency to make them work. These two issues, I will submit, underline the difficulty of practice democracy. So from the foregoing, it is not surprising we are confronted today with what is popularly termed the crisis of democracy. Even the so-called veteran democracies are equally feeling the heat. Lately, American scientists, political scientists, and analysts are doubting the survival of their own democracy. They say it is broken. Donald Trump indeed has proven that 250 years of the experiment give no comfort or assurance of sustainability. But the crisis in Africa is real. Adding to the long-standing crisis of political leadership, the emergence of military coups against democratically elected governments in recent times has heightened the concerns about failing democracies. Consequently, the relevance of democracy to Africa is increasingly being challenged. So is democracy fit for Africa? People are asking. A prominent voice of late in doubting the relevance belongs to former Nigerian President Obasanjo. He blames the crisis on, quote, Western liberal democracy, which imposes, and I quote, a government of a few people over all the people or population. In Ghana, clearly the enthusiasm with which the people welcomed the rebirth of democracy in 1993 and the euphoric pontification of the first successful change of government through the ballot box in 2000 have all but dissipated. Keen followers of Afrobarometer reports will have noticed that popular support for democracy in Ghana has suffered a downward trend since 2012, when the democratic choice. 3 years later, in 2015, support plummeted to 60% and has since been dropping precipitously. That is why a recent study by Dr. John Osai-Kwapon, a CDD fellow, employing data from Afrobarometer, confirms, and I quote, a high level of dissatisfaction with the way democracy is working. Indeed, frustration is rife over practiced democracy among Ghanaians from all walks of life, young and old. Many are disillusioned and are concluding that democracy has failed. And I think a good friend Samson Laudi on Newsfile recently bluntly put it that it has failed. The downslide in Ghana's democracy journey and the growing disenchantment relate to how democracy is working, as Osai-Kwapon says, and not the liberties and freedoms principled democracy bestows. And given the background perspective I've shared with you, I don't think you should be surprised. The key question to ask at this point is, why is our practiced democracy in such crisis? Why are some saying it is failing or breaking down? I think answers should be sought in the rapid decline of public trust in institutions of governance, including the key arms of government, and the failure of the human agency, that is political leadership, in delivering the democratic dividend. Let me now turn to the role of CDD in Ghana's democracy over the past 25 years, and what the center should be doing henceforth, especially in view of the conclusion by Osai-Kwapon and others that Ghanaians believe democracy is not working, if in fact it hasn't failed. But let me give a small caveat here. The views I express here are mine only, and not attributed to other founders of the CDD. I'm sure my good friend, Professor Boadi, has his own views, which may contrast with mine. Undoubtedly, I think the center's establishment was influenced and shaped by the political environment of the early 1990s, and its mission was powered and driven by the political orientation of the two key founders, both of whom got the advanced education and teaching experiences in the United States. As highly westernized scholars, and here my friend may disagree, anyway. As highly westernized scholars, I believe they were imbued not only with the values of Western liberalism, but also Western mannerisms. And here I recall the conversation we had over the spelling of the word center in the name of the organization. Have you noticed center? It's not the British spelling, it's the American spelling. Influence. The mantra, therefore, was to advocate the Western notion of liberal democracy, which is embedded in principled democracy. And so far, this seems to be the case at the center. But the center did more than that, I should say. It took practical steps to help the actualization of practiced democracy on the basis of the existing constitution. Though through the years, CDD raised questions about the inadequacies of some governance institutions and called for changes, on the whole, such calls dealt mostly with strengthening the principal side of democracy, principal side of the equation. It was later that calls for institutional changes through a review of the constitution were loudly made. Thus, in addition to research and publications on the concerns, programs were introduced to help build institutional and human capacity. Our schedule, I remember, was inundated with workshops, seminars, and conferences. And frankly, I recall the many moments we engaged the executive, parliament, and the judiciary, and many other stakeholders, state institutions. I don't know of any hotel across this country where we didn't spend days. We're able to be given free weekend treats by hotels because we were going to these hotels many, many times with our programs. Towards the 2000 election, that was to end effectively the long and tumultuous rule by the late Flight Lieutenant General Rawlings. The center sensed the public fear of uncertainty following his exit. The military had been his bulwark, and with this commitment to the Constitution in doubt, there were strong suspicions Rawlings, a known multiple coup maker, could spring another surprise, or at least cause instability at will. With grant support from the Ford Foundation, the center introduced a civil-military relations project that enabled us to embark on nationwide dialogues on healthy relations between soldiers and civilians. The key message was for soldiers to respect the Constitution and embrace civilian rule. Another area was the CDD support for Ghanaian elections, which is now legendary. Incidentally, Professor Jima Bodi and I worked together at the IEA and initiated the first mass-based nationwide election monitoring. We formed the network of domestic election observers, NEDEO, and deployed about 1,500 monitors during the 96 elections. But the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODEO, was formed by CDD towards the 2000 elections and has become the flagship election observer group in Ghana with influence almost across the region, the sub-region. I could spend time enumerating many projects and activities the center has undertaken over the years to help strengthen Ghana's democracy. There were also occasions where we initiated private meetings and discussions to get the political elite to show respect for the democratic agenda. Some of such encounters changed some big policy decisions for the sake of national peace and unity. But time is not on my side to go through this. But I think I will be remiss if I don't recount the private encounter Professor Jima Bodi and I had with Nana Akufo-Addo when he was the Minister for Justice and Attorney General in the Akufo administration. As a minister for this, he introduced the National Reconciliation Bill in 2001. The bill's preamble, the draft bill's preamble, was a huge pro-Buzia Dankwa political propaganda, not a statement that would heal the wounds of the nation and reconcile victims and perpetrators of political abuse in Ghana's history. The encounter we had with him led to the revision and watering down of the preamble. Let me begin to conclude my remarks with the following reflections on where CDD ought to be going from here. I think the past 25 years have been in many ways glorious for the center. But clearly, the widespread calls for constitutional review indicates the need for some radical changes in the way we perceive, practice democracy and how it ought to work in our country. The creation of the Constitutional Review Consultative Committee by Parliament, I'm happy a board member of CDD chairs that committee, still showing the power of the center. I think hopefully this will trigger a more serious commitment of the political elite to the agenda. In the past, the elite has not shown much excitement about proposals for review. But it's important for civil society to ensure that the initiative doesn't become stillborn. Unlike when we started 25 years ago, today there are a number of active and aggressive civil society groups in Ghana. But I expect CDD to create its own niche in this process. For me, the critical task is making practice democracy relevant and meaningful to Ghanaians. If what we have is not working, How do we make it work? If the institutions and the human agency are failing us, how do we get them to be positively responsive? This is the real challenge we face, and there are no easy answers. But let me, for a few minutes, hazard a few responses. As argued earlier, practice democracy should be localized. What local resources should influence the creation of institutions and structures and the norms to accompany them? What comes to mind readily for me is our chieftaincy institution. Prior to colonization, the introduction of Western system of governance, chiefs ruled. Don't forget that. During the era of colonization, they were pivots in the system of indirect rule by the colonizers. Above all, they owned the land that we all sit on. That's why there is always conflicts over lands, chiefs and all. How then can't we find them a more dynamic role in our modern governance structure? At least in local or district or traditional areas, chiefs could play leading roles not only in the development process, but also in the areas of peace and security. After all, governments have run to chiefs when they are unable to deal with issues of local nature. Even national challenges such as Galamsey, the minister has to run to chiefs to beg them to help them. We just have to think creatively. I'm aware of the problem with our traditional leaders, but I'm not sure our modern political leaders have proven any better. Aside from the chieftaincy, we should examine some of our core traditional values of life and incorporate them in our educational institutions as a part of preparing our young people for leadership. The failure of human agency in our practice democracy could be attributed to the lack of relevant leadership values which our traditions and culture uphold. I know I'm on shaky grounds here on this issue because of the controversy over culture and the pervasiveness of Western culture and values. But it's an issue we need to confront. Another area of focus I think CDD should be looking ahead to make our democracy more relevant and meaningful is the whole question of decentralization of power. The over-centralization of power at the executive and national levels has diminished grassroots democracy, which will be the foundation of democracy, by the way, and rendered local or community politics meaningless. It has created a master-servant relationship between the national leaders and the people. And it has killed local initiative and retarded community development. People who are older here will remember self-help project that led to communities building their own schools and even roads. So as we think of electing MDCs, we should also think of how to reduce their dependency on the central government. There should be fiscal decentralization that empowers the assemblies to be financially creative and responsible. The district assembly common fund is not enough, and it's even still controlled by the central government that releases the fund at its own discretion and pleasure. If local or community politics is made vibrant, productive, and profitable, young people who rush into national politics with no expertise and experience behind them will have the breeding ground to prepare for big-time politics. So recalling my earlier statement that practice democracy is not a straitjacket and that is not one size fits all, this means that we should find a way to create institutions and systems that reflect the reality of the Ghanaian. So I wish to conclude by saying nothing compels us to stick to what has failed for us. We have every right as sovereign people to create institutions and systems of our choice insofar as they meet the test of principled democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Another round of applause for him, please. And we'll be introducing soon our panelists who would give us their reflections and would also tell us a bit about CDD and the different roles that they have played. But there are a number of things that Prof mentioned that I think it's worth noting and maybe having our own reflections on, because we'll be coming to questions and engaging the panel. Some of the things, as he spoke, the first thing, CDD, your job will never end. I think you should note that one. There's a lot ahead. The fact that popular support for democracy has plummeted in Ghana, and in fact, not only in Ghana, in the whole sub-region. West Africa is in serious trouble. The decline in public trust in key institutions of governance. Western liberal democracy was what drove the two co-founders. But it's now being questioned, and I'm happy that, Prof, as you ended, you mentioned as looking at localization. What does that really look like? There are questions around that, and I'm sure we will engage that. Civil military projects, I thought that was very interesting. And there are some questions within civil society and also just general populace in the sub-region, especially where we've had military coups, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, about civil society engaging the military. I know this was in a different way for Ghana, because we were actually in civilian rule, we were in democracy then, practicing democracy. But there are some people that have been asking, should we as civil society be engaging the military now? And how should we be doing that to make sure that we change the tide, because we are retrogressing? CDD's role in elections in Ghana, and the way we perceive and practice democracy is something that we have to look at critically. We must practice democracy that is relevant and meaningful to Ghanaians. And he talked about localization, he talked about decentralization. So these are some of the points that I picked up from the lecture. Thank you very much, Prof. Bafo Agyeman-Duah. I will now like to introduce our panelists for the next session. We will have two panelists here physically that we would engage, and then we have two other panelists online. It's a hybrid situation. So let me introduce the first panelist, who is a CDD veteran and who was there with CDD right from the very beginning, Professor Audrey Gadzekpo. She's the board chair of CDD and a professor and former dean of the School of Information and Communication Studies, University of Ghana. She has close to 30 years of experience in teaching, research, and advocacy, primarily on media, gender development, and governance issues, and almost 35 years practical experience as a media practitioner. That's all she wanted me to read, but I think I have to add a bit more, because she has served in multiple capacities, including chairing and speaking at workshops, seminars, and colloquia, writing extensively for and serving on the editorial board of the Democracy Watch newsletter, which is the Center's official mouthpiece, contributing to the Center's scholarly publications. She's been involved in diplomatic briefings, led media monitoring activities, and provided media training to staff. And she has considerable experience, for all of us who know her, engaging in media, gender governance, and advocacy work, and several other initiatives. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome to the stage Professor Audrey Gadzekpo. And I would like to go on to introduce our next panelist who is here with us physically. And I think there's a mistake here because, please, he's not Mr., he's Alhaji. He has done the Hajj. So let me introduce Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu, who is the Executive Director and Technical Advisor of the Star Ghana Foundation. He has extensive experiences that span from facilitating strategic planning processes, design and implementation of monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, institutional strengthening of state and non-state actors at all levels of governance and program management. He has been involved in development management, civil society strengthening, and social development for nearly 20 years. You've taken out the students' activism time. He has extensive experiences in strategic planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, institutional capacity strengthening at all levels of governance, policy influencing, people management, and funds management. He has also worked extensively with the government of Ghana, with local and international civil society organizations and bilateral aid agencies in Ghana, particularly in the field of voice and accountability, access to justice, civil society strengthening, governance and social development, and accountability. My pleasure, Alhaji Ibrahim Tanko Amidu. And I'll now introduce our panelists online. I don't know if we have, oh, wonderful. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Kweku Awochi. Mr. Awochi is currently the board chairman of UBA, the United Bank for Africa Ghana Limited, the Multimedia Group Limited in Ghana, and the non-profit Sports for Development organization, Play Soccer Ghana, which he co-founded in 1999. I can bet many of us did not know that. He has been the past board chairman of Stanbic Bank Ghana Limited from 2012 to 2018, and VRA from 2017 to 2021. In between corporate assignments, he has been involved in several entrepreneurial ventures in electric utilities, oil and gas, and mining across Africa. He has a strong commitment to good governance, corporate and political, and has been a member of the CDD board since 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kweku Awochi. And finally, last but not the least, Mrs. Rhoda Osei Afo. Do we have her online? I think we will see her when she makes her presentation. She is currently the research assistant coordinator for the Elite Africa Project and a PhD student in political science at the University of Toronto, specializes in public policy and comparative politics. Prior to pursuing her doctoral studies, she served as a senior research analyst and team lead for elections and anti-corruption programming at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development. Her professional interests and research interests encompass democracy, governance in Africa, elections, gender, and inclusive development. And with over 10 years of experience, she has actively contributed to electoral integrity initiatives in Ghana, Nigeria, and other parts of Africa. Can we give her a round of applause? Mrs. Rhoda Osei Afo. So, my esteemed panelists, I think that we'll be engaging the issues from different perspectives. Let me start with our current board chair, who has been with CDD right from the very beginning, to make her presentation. Oh, you have a mic, okay. Can you
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, CDD friends, and CDD family members. They say time flies when you're having fun. And it's hard to imagine, it's been 25 years already since CDD was established. And I feel very privileged to have been a part of that fruitful journey right from the start. As I begin my trip down memory lane, though, I first want to acknowledge that it's been an absolute pleasure to have served with different distinguished persons on the board of CDD. We still mourn the passing of our former chair, Mr. Sede, and Her Excellency Justice Therese Strigner Scott, both of whom have joined our ancestors. May their souls find eternal rest. I acknowledge also Mr. Kwesi Abiesi, our first board chair, other former board members, Professor Angela Laminsdorf Oforiata, Professor Kwesi Yanka, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, Justice Angela Domachere, Mr. William Yeboah, Mr. Franklin Odro, Mr. Henry Baye, Professor Agnes Apusiga, and I also appreciate the current board which I chair and the rich diversity and contribution members continue to bring to the center's work. My vice chair, Mrs. Clara Kasati, Professor E. Jimabwedi, the former executive director, Mr. James Raha, board secretary, Mrs. Sadia Chinrihese, Mr. Felix Biga, Mr. Kojo Asante, Dr. Edem Solomon. I think Edem is perhaps one of the longest serving CDD employees. And of course, Professor Bad sitting next to me, and Mr. Kweku Awotri, who are here on the panel. There is no question in my mind that CDD has made significant, I dare say, transformative contributions to Ghana and Africa's still fragile democratic journey through its many impactful, innovative programs, too numerous to count. And it has also, through the institutions it has birthed, the democracy-related institutions, including CODEO, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, Afrobarometer, and the Ghana Integrity Initiative. In my reflections today, I'd like to start by also pointing to these annual lecture series as an exemplar of CDD's commitment to providing platforms for deep reflection and conversations on the state of democracy, not just in Ghana, but in Africa. As Professor Prempe noted in his welcome, there's been very many notable speakers, including presidents. We've had President Festus Mogae, for example, former president of Botswana, and of course, His Excellency Busumuru Kofi Annan, who I had the privilege to introduce when he delivered the 12th lecture in 2016. It was on peaceful and credible elections, and many points he made during that lecture resonate today. Kofi Annan has a great sense of humor, those of you who know him. And I remember when I introduced him, I said he truly needed no introduction because, you know, he's Kofi Annan. And when he got up to speak, he refuted that by telling us how he and his wife went, I think, to Italy or Spain to hide away for a minute so they could rest. And how one day they decided to venture out to get a newspaper, and he was promptly recognized and accosted by someone who wanted his autograph. And he was like, oh gosh, our cover has been blown. Only for the person, after he had signed the autograph, to say very nicely to him, thank you, Mr. Morgan Freeman. But the joke aside, something Kofi Annan said that day, some 7 years ago, should exercise our minds today, given the turbulent democratic world we live in and what is happening in our neighboring countries. And also especially since we are approaching elections next year. he said that even though this country is reputed to be a model of democracy in Africa, we in Ghana know, and I quote, that each election has garnered a worrying degree of violence and uncertainty. A worrying degree of violence and uncertainty. So he warned that we must keep ensuring quality, peaceful, and credible elections, and crucially not take democracy for granted, because it is essential for our progress, no matter how bumpy the road, no matter our problems. We must resist wishing for strong men or benevolent dictators as the solution, because invariably it is a slippery slope from authoritative leadership to authoritarianism. So, Madam Moderator, I like to think those wise words of Busumoro underline CDD's mission and uncompleted mission, the relentless pursuit of ensuring that our democracy survives. And that's why CODEO is a good exemplar of some of the institutions that CDD has built to make sure that happens, to bring transparency to our election process. And it's hard to imagine election in Ghana, whether national or local government or party primaries or by-elections, without this wide coalition of domestic election, independent, non-partisan observers drawn from many organizations, scrutinizing and reporting on what is going on. And so I salute the first coach, salute you, and the late Justice VCRAC Crab. Let me also add that the CODEO experience shows how our institutions, how CDD has contributed beyond the shores of Ghana, because CODEO's expertise is sought by election observer groups from countries such as Kenya, Liberia, Burundi, Nigeria, Togo, and the Central African Republic. And I'm also proud of the PVT methodology that CODEO pioneered. And also, another contribution is that CODEO is also a founding member of the West African Election Observers Network. Now, my second example of CDD spreading its influence, birthing institutions, and spreading its tentacles beyond Ghana is Afrobarometer, an innovative Pan-African research network co-founded by Professor Jima Bwedi when he was executive director in 1999. Round one surveys covered 12 African countries, I recall. Today, Afrobarometer surveys, which are a source of rich, reliable, timely data on the views of ordinary Africans on issues like democracy, governance, economy, and society, are conducted in some 35 African countries. And we can give CDD a clap for that. The last but not the least of CDD's organizational births, I would call it, is Ghana Integrity Initiative, the Ghanaian chapter of the global anti-corruption organization, Transparency International. And I happen to have chaired GII for a few years back. And GII was born in 1999, has proven its worth when it comes to anti-corruption work in Ghana. The Corruption Perception Index it launches every year provides us with an indication of how poorly we're doing in the fight against corruption, and it's a source of great irritation to all administrations and governments without fear or favor. And worth finally recalling also is CDD's tremendous contribution to the work of Ghana's National Reconciliation Commission, NRC, and I see Professor Atefa there. He was the executive secretary. And then somebody mentioned also its flagship publication, Democracy Watch, which I often contributed to and edited. And I pray that as part of the uncompleted work, that we revive it to its formal glory. And the output, the sheer output of numerous research publications, briefing papers, occasional papers, and also some of the important programs it's implemented, particularly in the early years of Ghana's democratic transition. Programs such as abuse of incumbency, presidential term limits, assets declaration, and human rights, including for people living with disabilities and LGBTQ persons now. Programs also aimed at strengthening key democratic institutions such as Parliament, the judiciary, and the media. Madam Moderator, I think I have made my case of the role that CDD has played in Ghana's democracy and continues to play. And in the interest of time, I'll end these initial reflections by simply saying to CDD management and hardworking staff that you've come a long way, baby. Aiko, but we have many miles to go before we sleep. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Indeed, many miles to go. Let's not take democracy for granted. I think we shouldn't forget that. And you really talked about what CDD has done, but particularly what struck me was the knowledge curation and the contribution that CDD has made, not only in Ghana, but actually on the continent. And I will now turn over the mic to Mr. Kweku Awotri, who is a current board member of CDD, and one of the people that, from the Nigerian films that I watch, you will call the champion of industry. Mr. Kweku Awotri, over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Nana. I hope you can hear me all right. And good evening, everybody. And first of all, I do want to give a special show of appreciation to the organizers for CDD itself for honoring me with this invitation on this very august occasion. As was said earlier, I joined CDD back in 2017. It's hard to believe it's already almost 6 years now. But a lot of that has to do with the private sector's interest in good governance in the country. We may not be politicians, but anyone in the private sector, anyone who serves on boards of corporate boards of any kind will tell you that the elements of good governance in a corporate environment are very similar to the issues that civil society organizations, politicians worry about when we think of the Constitution, when we think about the governance in any country. And you know, whatever the system, and we can get into that, you know, the private sector is very much a stakeholder in seeing that our country does practice good governance. I think Audrey has done a good job talking about the journey we're on, and I can share a few words about that. But from the private sector's point of view, good governance primarily and initially means fiduciary responsibility. And anybody on the board will tell you that is our first and primary responsibility. So what does that mean? It means good reporting, accountability, accuracy, able to explain how we spend our funds. I think those of you in the audience will smile when you know, there's a conversation going on about how are we spending money in the government, or when we talk about campaign finance reform or the need for it. In any corporate board environment, these things are a given, the need for fiduciary responsibility. So that conversation that has to be had at the government level for it to be still discussed as if it's something we still need to think about, it shows the kind of challenge we have in the country and the kinds of roles and actions that a CDD has to take on. Good governance in a corporate environment also means checks and balances and accountabilities. At any point, one has to provide reports that a board has to interrogate, has to ask questions about, in much the same way that might happen in Parliament, for instance. Of course, it's a much smaller environment, much smaller audience, but members of the executive or members of management are required to explain themselves as to why certain outcomes took place. So you can imagine that in the private sector, we are very interested to know how our government is working. If it is working well, it means there's fiduciary responsibility. If it's working well, it means there are checks and balances and accountabilities. And one final thing as far as the role of boards in the private sector that apply equally in government is long-term planning. And many of you will recognize that a board has to have a strategic plan, a long-term plan for its organization. And this is a conversation that we've also had at the country level. What is our government doing long-term? How are we thinking about our long-term problems? How are we thinking about our long-term solutions? And the conversation we've been having lately is that 4-year cycle that we have adopted, plans, actions, requirements that our country needs. So to the extent that we can have input, to the extent that we can be part of that conversation, these are things that we equally need in the private sector, but we see that an organization like CDD is very much required to be part of that conversation, very much required to prosecute those questions, the answering of those questions. Of course, we're very pleased that they do it not just in Ghana, they do it in other African countries as well. But our input, I think, is really quite important. What I would finally say is that those of us in the private sector, we think about cities and pesos greatly. So when we come to an organization like a CDD, that importance of our own, good governance, our own reporting, our own financial practices, they are bedrocks to a successful organization. If we have trouble accounting for how we spend our funds, if we have trouble justifying why we need to take one action over another, these are things that reflect on an organization. So even as we go out as CDD and we want to interrogate and we want to stimulate a civil discourse on liberal democracy or the cracks in it, we ourselves have to have a strong foundation. I like to believe that coming from the private sector, we provide some of that perspective, some of that discipline, and some of that input. Let me end there for now, and hopefully there'll be another opportunity to add to the conversation. So thank you, Nana.
Forget that the private sector also has a role to play in democratic development. You talked about something that I think many people ask questions about, but we don't really get the answer. The long-term development plan for Ghana. Where is it? What's happening to that? And the transparency and accountability, not only of our governments, but our own civil society institutions, and how important that is for us, and the fact that CDD has that. So that's wonderful to hear. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Alhaji Tanko, who has been one of the key partners of CDD. And I believe you would speak to us also from that perspective as a key development partner.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me join everyone who has spoken so far in congratulating CDD on its 25th anniversary and managing to survive and thrive within the quite difficult environment and context within which civil society operates, not just in Ghana, but in the region as a whole. I would describe myself as a friend of CDD, but also as head of Star Ghana in its previous form as the Star Ghana program. I think we did a lot of work with CDD, funding quite a number of its programs and projects, but also that's in terms of the co-creation of a number of initiatives that Star Ghana has worked with CDD on. I would like to share some very brief reflections from two perspectives. One from CDD's role within the civil society sector or space in Ghana, and secondly, CDD and democracy and governance in the country. And in terms of CDD and civil society, I would say that the role and the achievements of CDD have been extremely significant, but because of how it's done, it's almost like below the radar, but nonetheless very, very significant, very, very important, and critical to a lot of the successes that, or the results that civil society has achieved to date. And I'll start with the generation and making available of evidence that anchors a lot of civil society advocacy and actions in the country. That without the evidence base, without access to very rigorous, evidence, research, the advocacy will not be taken seriously. Advocacy would not be effective. So not just with this Afrobarometer, but a lot of the research papers, research that CDD generates and put out is something that's been very, very useful, very critical to civil society advocacy. 2 days ago, Star Ghana hosted a speakers breakfast forum, on parliament and civil society in the country. And the one key document, evidence that the speaker kept on referring to was the Afrobarometer to, support his points and etc. So I think in that sense, CDD's work has been very, very critical, very necessary for the work of civil society. I think the other one has been the convening of critical alliances, networks, of civil society, of stakeholders around, particular issues. So just the recent one has been the We Be Citizens, one. There's been the one around the Auditor General and the issue of the search charges, the Corruption Watch, etc. Because we do know that in the current context within which we operate, you bring out your head as an individual and it's chopped off. You move as a collective, and it's not just about the protection in the numbers, but also the effectiveness. I remember in the early days of the PNDC, some people were talking with a chief and the PNDC secretary for Navrongo in those days were having an argument and etc. And the chief said, look, when I speak with all the people, in my traditional area. When you speak, who do you speak with? Apart from that white man in Accra who has brought you here. So kind of the whole thing about the fact that if you speak alone, if you stand alone, you are not as effective, you are not as respected as if you did that as a collective. And I think that is a very, very important contribution that CDD has made to development practice and effectiveness in the country in terms of mobilizing these alliances and etc. when issues have come up. I think a third area still around civil society strengthening is this whole thing about the fact that CDD doesn't give up because of the short-termism when it comes to the way donors fund, projects and etc. You would see that an issue becomes a flavor of the period. Everybody is talking about it, and then after 2-3 years, when the funding goes down, it gets dropped. Campaign financing, for example, the whole issue around the election of DCs and etc. At various times, people have picked it up, dropped it, and etc. But CDD has consistently followed through with that. And I think that is what makes it stand out from other think tanks, other national CSOs. The ability to follow an issue for as long as it takes. Of course, there will be ebbs and flows in the way, the attention that it is given, but it is never dropped as we do. Then the third one around the civil society, CDD and civil society, has been the whole issue around nurturing civil society leaders. We've seen a number of very key civil society leaders emerge out of CDD's staff, CDD's work, and etc. But we've also seen the effects of the internship programs that it provides at various levels. And I think that is something that fills a very critical gap. You can go to school or university and learn how to do accounting, learn how to do etc. But there are certain things about development practice that you need to be nurtured, you need to be mentored, etc. And I think that is one of the things that CDD has done so well. And I think I'm not as well organized as the mother of my niece, so yes. And of course, I would need to also touch on being brave enough to go where angels fear to tread? Because they've taken up a lot of the very, very hot issues in this country. There have been backlashes and etc. But they've walked with it, they've gone with it, and we would need to hear how they do it, the courage that it has taken. Where is that courage coming from? They say that, I think it was Chino Achebe that said, if you see somebody dancing around, being foolhardy or very brave in battle, it means that the person has a very powerful spirit at home. That is... So, CDD, which spirit have you hidden at home that we don't know of? So that we, those who don't have those kind of spirits, we don't just watch you and then go straight into battle and then realize that... And then I think very briefly on governance and democracy in Ghana. I think what you've done, has been largely shaped by the context, the demands of the time. CDD emerged at a time when Ghana's democracy was very young, when we're trying to anchor it, when we're trying to strengthen it. And so quite a lot of the work has been around first shepherding the process of developing the democracy, strengthening it. The second has been, for me, around the whole thing about the pillars for shaping democracy and democratic governance in Ghana. How do we strengthen these pillars? What do we look at? And when we listened to Professor Jimendua this evening, he went back to one of it, talked about why are we not looking about the whole institution of chieftaincy and its role in our governance and etc. So all those pillars, not just about institutions, but also about the values and etc. CDD has, worked around that. Of course, the issue around the chieftaincy and our governance, some of us may have other, slightly different takes on it, but I think just raising it and putting it on the table for me is quite important. But I think a critical value addition of CDD to our governance and to the nurturing of democracy It's not just looking at the processes, looking at the institutions, at the pillars, but going beyond that to ask, so what do citizens think of it? How is it working for the citizens of this country and other countries? And so through Afrobarometer and etc., it's helped us to put a finger on the pulse. What is happening? What issues do citizens, consider very important? How do we, work with them towards strengthening? Because very easily, Accra can become almost like an echo chamber. We talk to each other and we think that what we are seeing, what matters to us is the most important. And you drive maybe 5-10 kilometers outside of Accra, and what they see as critical will be completely different from the echo chamber of Accra and the Accra morning shows, which kind of tend to think that, okay, what we are discussing on these breakfast shows are the most important things when people are grappling with that. So I think in terms of that, that has been very, very, very useful. I can't end without talking about the founders of CDD and how by sheer force of the intellects or the determination, they have shaped not just the institution, not the organization, but also the discourse around it. The sense of, the integrity, the values, what to focus on, etc. And we've seen a bit of it because Professor Jima straddles both CDD and Star Ghana. Professor Jima is on the governing council of the Star Ghana Foundation. And there are a lot of things that we are doing, a lot of the questions that we're asking ourselves that have come from his experiences with CDD. That, has brought to bear on the development of Star Ghana Foundation. So where we are 5 years after this, 5 years since the foundation was set up, is partly due to the questions that he has asked, to the lessons that he has brought to the table from the CDD experience. And I would conclude by saying that, yes, CDD has done very well. We look up to it, we applaud. But also then how does it shape itself to the new context, the emerging context? There are new forms of citizen organizing. How is CDD engaging or preparing itself to engage with this new, well, not really new, but the current prominent forms of civil society organizing, largely informal activists, organizations, and etc. What do we do? How do you engage with them? The second has been the fact that, yes, when you ask about CDD, a lot of people will talk about the research it conducts and etc. I will talk about a democracy strengthening value chain, if something like that exists. Where did you position yourself in this value chain at the beginning? Is that position still relevant now, or you need to look at other areas within that value chain and how that can be? And the last but not the least for me is how do you want to engage with a very critical demographic, this thing in this country, the youth. The last 2 days ago, somebody mentioned that the youth are now or will be 60% of the population of this country. Very critical force. I look at the audience today, and with due respect to age, but I see a lot of very grizzled veterans of the struggle. And your wisdom, well, I'm saying you're as if I'm out of it. I'm part of that generation. But how do we increasingly bring the youth not just into these conversations, but into the leadership and the management of the center? Despite all this, CDD, Yatuma Tuma, Nituma, Ayiku. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alaj. You've raised some key points. Evidence-based advocacy, the solidarity building of CDD, and you forgot WADEMOS, which is the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. So it's not only Ghana, also looking at the region. The tenacity, the endurance, the consistency, and nurturing civil society leaders, the next generation, the courage, the boldness, and the bravery. And you said they should share their secrets. What is the spirit? So please, we will be expecting. Shepherding the process, the citizen engagement, and the co-founders, the values-driven mission that you drove and are still investing in, and looking at the emerging you also posed some questions. The emerging context, where is CDD positioning itself, and how do we bring the youth in? Thank you very much, Alhaji. Thank you very much. And I would finally like to invite Mrs. Rhoda Oseyafo, if we can have Rhoda's presentation.
Good evening, Madam Board Chair and special guests. It is my pleasure to provide some brief reflections on my years of work with CDD-Ghana. Mine comes to roughly 10 years out of the total 25 years of the institution's existence. The first thing I want to highlight about my work with the center is the very professional, dispassionate, and non-partisan manner with which management and staff pursue the organization's mission of promoting democratic governance in the country. I know that ordinarily this shouldn't be eye-catching, as it is what you would expect of an organization like CDD. But given the high degree of mistrust and suspicion in the general political climates within which the institution operates, I find it significant to highlight this here. Many of us may be aware of the kinds of criticisms leveled against civil society organizations in the country by sections of the public, especially political parties and politicians. The sector is often criticized for its seeming silence on some national issues, and yet it is castigated for speaking up when it does. CSOs are also sometimes accused of doing the so-called bidding of international partners, who, as many in this room cannot deny, provide very needed financial resources to organizations working to address a diverse set of issues in the country. While CSOs receive or attract little to no significant financial resources domestically, the public has very high expectations about their work. And the point here, of course, is not that CSOs should not be criticized, but really the somehow contradictory nature between expectations and support. And often, even more importantly, such criticisms are situated within the discourse of partisan bias. And so it is within this sort of background that it was reassuring for me to have witnessed firsthand that CDD pursued its goals and objectives without any fear or favor for any particular stakeholder, actor, or interest. The program proposal writing process at the center, the numerous deliberations around program design, planning, and program implementation, as I witnessed, were all conducted in a manner that focused on addressing crucial national challenges the country's relatively young democracy was and is concerned. The Research and Programs Department, for instance, has a transparent and open approach to its activities. And day-old short-term staff, including international and domestic interns, for instance, are comfortably integrated into research and program activities. The center would apply for and solicit or receive funding for activities which it believes align with its areas of work, vision, and mission as an organization. And as being non-partisan, both in theory and in practice, CDD has been able to support diverse political processes in the country and provided voice on issues so germane to our country's democratic development. Issues such as those around abuse of executive power, issues around electoral reforms, and gaps in civic education. And this is an important legacy we cannot overlook. Now, related to the above and quite intriguing is really the ability of the center to attract and bring on board a diverse group of individuals who are passionate about its mission and vision. And quite frankly, I'm yet to place a finger on where the cat sits as to whether these individuals come to the institution already with a passion for the institution's mission and vision, knowing what it stands for, or rather that this passion develops in the course of their work with the center. I'm inclined to believe this lies somewhere in between. But again, the point here for me is that the real gem of the institution has been the caliber of men and women it is able to attract to support its vision. These men and women brace various challenges to meet the demands of the organization. Their selflessness and commitment, ownership and support for the programs of the center has been admirable. From answering media calls and requests for representations at all manner of times, to traversing the length and breadth of the country and engaging with the range of stakeholders, staying long days away from their families. I must perhaps add that they do these with very limited incentives. Beyond the physical walls of the organization, CDD also attracts and successfully mobilizes thousands of ordinary citizens to be vanguards of our country's democracy. And the interest and enthusiasm of well-meaning Ghanaians, including teachers, young graduates, accountants, some retired diplomats, and others from around the country in participating in the center's electoral support interventions, for instance, was encouraging and noteworthy. Many have stayed long days and nights and commuted distances just to play their roles in voluntary positions in ensuring credible electoral outcomes. The second key issue I want to highlight is the center's ability to successfully channel the country's social capital to advance democratic peace and stability. In my program area and through the work of the CODEO Advisory Board, CDD successfully mobilized eminent statesmen and women who demonstrated and continue to demonstrate selflessness and true love for the nation to ensure that the nation keeps the peace. Their behind-the-scenes engagement, which often doesn't come out, with key state institutions such as the Electoral Commission and the security agencies at very critical times have sometimes been crucial to steering the country on the right track as far as peace and stability is concerned. At this point, kindly permit me to acknowledge the leadership of the eminent Professor Miranda Greenstreet and the late Justice VCR AC Crab and many others, dead and living, through their involvement in CDD's programs and initiatives, have worked tirelessly to support democratic peace in the country. Also, through the membership of CODEO, CDD has effectively mobilized diverse civil society organizations, including professional bodies, and there are so many in this area that I can mention, from the Ghana Bar Association to the Ghana Medical Association, the Ghana Registered Nurses Association, the Ghana National Association of Teachers, and faith-based organizations including the Christian Council of Ghana, the Ghana Pentecostal and Charismatic Council, and the Office of the Chief Imam, as well as civil society organizations such as Abantu for Development, the Ghana Integrity Initiative, and the Ghana Anti-Corruption Campaign Coalition, to promote inclusive political participation. The level of success chalked by the institution in this area of mobilization has won the admiration of many sister organizations from around the subcontinent, especially those who recognize the difficulties associated with building coalitions of this nature, coalitions that are situated within the electoral environment. As a result, the center has been called upon to share its success story with many other organizations in countries such as Kenya, Zambia, Nigeria, and Tanzania, among others. The center's collaborative approach to its work has also been admirable. It has found no reason to hold back to partnership with other key actors such as CSOs, the media, and state institutions, especially when it identifies such partnerships as crucial to addressing identified governance challenges. Many of its programs have been designed with partnerships in mind, and it has successfully brought on board a range of actors whose role it deemed relevant in achieving specific objectives. An important message coming out from the mobilizing efforts of CDD really is the fact that there are so many resourceful Ghanaians who are willing and ready to render selfless services for the good of the country. And here, specifically speaking to politicians, if only we can transcend partisan lines to reach out broadly, there's so many who are willing to support nation building. If only we can dispassionately seek, we will gladly find them, and together we can build the Ghana we long for. On the other side of things, and quite unfortunately, it was also disheartening to realize the limits to our efforts as an organization in advancing democratic development. We cannot lose sight of the enormity of the continuing challenges and threats to our country's democracy. Beyond elections, public demand for accountability from public officials is still shockingly low, and it barely crosses partisan lines. And in my view, extreme political polarization along partisan lines has unfortunately effectively weakened public demand for accountability and the country's democracy and development. And due to this, I believe that developing innovative interventions aimed at addressing such a gap in public demand for public accountability should be part of the next level of the center's programming. I also find it really unfortunate that the country missed an important opportunity in 2019 to reform our local governance system with the last-minute cancellation of the referendum on local government reforms of that year and the subsequent withdrawal from Parliament of a bill to amend the Constitution in that respect. The Center, of course, with support from development partners, had put so much effort into sensitizing many Ghanaians around the country on the issues. And I remember we engaged extensively key political stakeholders on the need for reforms and the likely implications of such reforms. And yet this last-minute development in the reform process was unfortunate, not just because as a center we strongly believe that electing metropolitan, municipal and district chief executives would strengthen political accountability and minimize the effect of the winner-takes-all nature of our political system, but also because Afrobarometer survey data had shown that Ghanaians overwhelmingly supported local government reforms. At the very least, they should have been provided the opportunity to make their voices heard on these reforms. Situated within a broader context of a lack of progress on efforts towards broader constitutional reforms, this for me highlights the need to work towards a broad-based citizen demand for constitutional reforms. And the center clearly has a major task here. As we all may be aware, there is more work to be done to advance democratic consolidation than I cannot outline here. And yet there are financial limitations to the work of an institution like CDD in addressing some of these issues. I will urge that the center pursues some of the innovative fundraising plans it previously identified at various levels. The public has very high expectation about the institution's work, but this has yet to translate into significant financial support from the same public. The center can help Ghanaians appreciate the tremendous work it does and the need for all to lend a hand of support. Finally, we have recently witnessed the first leadership transition within the institution at both management and board levels. The first generation of the institution's leadership is gradually giving way to a new generation of leadership. And the next 25 years and beyond of the institution's existence and role in the country is very well going to be defined by how well the new and subsequent leadership holds up to the center's core principles, vision and mission, and even move it to the next level of research, advocacy, and policy engagement. The center indeed is a gift to the country's democracy, and it will be Ghana's loss if this legacy does not carry forward. On this anniversary edition of Kronti Akwamu, I extend my congratulations to the entire staff and management of the center and hope that the center continues to thrive while the country's democracy advances forward. Our governance system is in need of rigorous checks and balances, and it is my expectation that in the next 25 years, CDD-Ghana will, working in collaboration with key actors in our governance space, play an even bigger role to advance democratic governance. Long live CDD, long live Ghana. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. These are the perspectives of an insider. The elders say that when a frog comes out of a river and tells you that there's a crocodile there, you had better not doubt it. So she has talked about professionalism as being key, the non-partisan nature of the way CDD works. They are issue-based, the passion, the ownership, selflessness, and commitment of staff, board, management. And she talked again about the citizens' engagement. In fact, it made me remember connecting it to the youth question, the secondary school program that CDD has. I think that's one of the most innovative programs on democratic governance that we have in the country. The ability to mobilize different constituencies within civil society, and some of the issues that she thinks we should push forward with, the constitutional reform issues, the decentralization and election of DCs and MCEs, that's whether Ghanaian, the resource challenges. And one of the things that I admire personally when it comes to CDD, leadership and transitions. But then she did say that the new leadership should make sure that they hold on to their vision and continue with the good work. Can we all give a round of applause to our panelists for their brilliant presentations? Prof. Bafo Ajimandria, Professor Odrigajepo, Alaji Tanko, Mr. Kwekwa Wotre, and Mrs. Rhoda Osei Afo. Thank you very much. Now we would have Hewale give us a break with a beautiful rendition. And whilst we listen, let's reflect on the things that we have heard. Ask our questions after the break, and the panel will respond. And not only the panel, I think that we have key CDD, CDD affiliates. Let me just put it that way here. And so there may be some questions that we could have even responses from some of us in the audience. So, Hewale. Hewale Nga means strength.
ponsa mi jawari, ya ponse jawari. Ya ponse jawari, ya ponse jawari, ya ponsa mi jawari, ya ponsa mi jawari, ah jawari. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening.
Thank you very much, Hewale. So the floor is now open for any questions, comments. I'll take the first round of 5. Do we have anyone who wants to share your own perspectives? Or do you have any questions for the panel? Thank you, sir. Can we have a mic here? Thank you. Maybe if you could kindly...
My name is Idris Abdussaini, former member of Parliament for Central Constituency. Now, I think that I would like to associate myself with the pronouncements made by all the panelists in congratulating CDD for anchoring and consolidating Ghana's democracy. Indeed, the contribution of CDD to the consolidation of our democracy cannot be understated. Now, to the question. Actually, listening to Mr. Ajibandua, Professor Ajibandua, and this is the second time I'm listening to you on your submissions of principled democracy and practice democracy. It appears to me that whereas principled democracy appears to be universal, immutable, the institutions are fluid. Now, 30 years ago, you
started an experiment with a constitution. Many have also traversed the same path, like us. Their constitutions appear to have endured. Was our beginning a faulty exercise? It's like that 30 years down the line, we are clamoring for a review. Second, and your presentation has got me thinking, is it that those institutions that were established by the Constitution to undergird what democracy are still relevant, except that we as a people appear to be steeped in the past, and that our attitudes are not changing fast enough to provide the democratic dividends. In fact, just sitting and listening to you, I think that we need to place a finger where the problem is. I'm an avid supporter of constitutional reform, but having listened to you, we need to put a finger on what the problem is that is not delivering the democratic dividends and whittling down the confidence and trust of the citizens in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Perhaps we should get a response, and then, Prof, I think this was directed to you, but we could get others supporting as well. So please.
I would say that's an excellent question you've raised. And I've been intrigued by the same question for years since I started developing this thought. And I'm glad you said this is the second time you heard me speak about the difference that I've made. And I'm intentionally repeating it because I think I'm provoking people like you and other thinkers to begin to look at our democracy critically. As I said and you have repeated, there is something fundamentally wrong with us. People are people themselves. In fact, I use the term the human agency that is expected to make the institutions functional. There's something wrong with it. And that relates to leadership, the leadership issue, because people who are in positions to run the institutions themselves have a defect. We need to put our finger on it. We can discuss that. Then the institutions themselves that we have established. One perspective I have is that, not that if you say parliament, it should be parliament per se is simply a place where representatives of people meet to make decisions on behalf of the larger group. Because all of us cannot meet. Like the original conception of democracy was with the ancient Athenians. They could meet together at the Agora and make their decisions. But now we have representative democracy. You see, what is interesting is that if you look at various democracies, the same parliament may have very interesting differences in terms of how they function, in terms of how even they select their reps. And when you go to the national level, electing presidents or leaders, there are some interesting differences. South Africa, they don't do universal elections for presidents. You know that. Once you're a leader of the party you win, you are president. So they cut out some of the rivalries and the tension that we suffer here by virtue of their system of electing presidents. And that's why I like saying that it's not a straitjacket. We don't have to be fixated on what is done in the West. So looking at our circumstance, our environment, can we begin to think of alternatives to how we select our president, for instance? And now that we're encountering serious challenge of monetizing our politics. And it's increasing by every election. Is that the way we need to go? Can't we think of a different system that will perhaps mute out this kind of money playing a central role in the way we elect our leaders? So, frankly, what I'm doing is to provoke people like you and others to begin to think. It's not that there are no alternatives. There are. But I think to a large extent, we may be a little bit lazy intellectually in seeking those alternatives. It's difficult, but we need to do it. So, in simple terms, what I'm proposing is that if we look closely at some of our traditional practices, and here I know some people will say, oh, in modern times you can't do something like that. But no, there are certain mutations we can make on certain traditional issues to modernize them, to bring them at par with what we want today. So, let me give you an example. Gambia, you know their recent elections. I don't know if you followed it. They did a very interesting innovation. They said they didn't have much money to do the electronics and other things. We spend, I don't know, $400 million every election time, or maybe less, I don't know. But the Gambians said, look, when it comes to voting, we don't have money to invest. So they came up with the idea of simply using pebbles and slotting them in barrels. Some people may say that's primitive, you see, but the fact is the central point about elections is how people decide who is the leader. Whether you decide by electronic or you decide by remote voting, whatever. But Gambia shows one possibility of limiting the needless expenditure we have on elections. In the end, every election is controversial anyway. Yet, we vote millions of dollars every 4 years. Another point, why are we glued to 4-year tenure that every 4 years we should have elections? Some countries have elections every 5 years, 7 years, right? Britain even doesn't have a tenure. Once you are prime minister until you are voted out by your party or by the general population. So why do we have to impose on ourselves that it should be 4 years? I don't know the rationale of the constitution drafters, why 4 years they thought, maybe we were just mimicking the Americans. You see, why didn't we then mimic the French, who used to have 7 years? So all these are questions. Finally, practice democracy is not a straitjacket. And therefore, we should have the freedom of mind to explore, to find responses that to be relevant to our reality. In fact, that is exactly the point I'm pushing. I hope I made sense to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. But please let me just push you a bit on that point. Who will bail the cat? You have said we should do this and we should. So who are the we? Because I think it's important for us as civil society to also know, are we the we? And if we are not, because I don't think we have the power, where should we be focusing our attentions on? So who would you say that we are?
Well, I think basically it's a shared responsibility. The we are the people of Ghana. That is the constituent parts of that population. Technically, if we have our way, it should be the executive that should promote it, the changes that we want. But personally, I don't believe in the current political elite. They have self-interest in the existing structures and systems. They won't change it. When they are in opposition, they see some gaps. When they are in power, those gaps become beneficial. So I don't trust them to do that. That's why when I started the committee set up by Parliament, I think it's interesting. And I think this is where civil society can be very active in supporting the process to the extent of getting the elite to come into the picture, you see. And also, let's be careful. When former President Atta Mills, the late Atta Mills, initiated such a process, you remember that in the end, his government decided to pick and choose. Even when there was overwhelming evidence for elective MDCs, they say, no, why don't you give us 3? Then we decide on 1, remember. So for some reasons, I think, my good friend, I see Honorable Ato, we go back to the early days of CDD. The many, many workshops and seminars and what have you that not only CDD, but many other organizations have pushed. You may think by now we are making some dent on politicians, but I think it's tough. So in simple response to you is that this opportunity provided by the Parliament's initiative is something that civil society should pick it up. And that's why I believe CDD may have its own role as it's been doing over the decades. So you need committed politicians, you need committed leaders. But again, personally, I'm so skeptical about political leaders to effect that change. So without a push by civil society, we may not have a way.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have Kojo's hand up. So, Kojo Asante, CDD.
All right, thank you. When I started in civil society in the early 2000s, and good to see Honorable Ato here. I take Parliament as an example. Parliament as an example. There's several committee meetings, doing the clause-by-clause reviews. You had a sense that the politicians that participated, MPs that participated in these processes were committed to the national interest. They would stay for days, debating, arguing, reading the text, and Honorable Nusaf Hussein is here. Many thousands. And if I participate in the same committees today, there will be 4 people that are paying serious attention to what's going on. Everybody's on their phone outside the room. When you talk about principled democracy, they exhibited in abundance. People's logic, they argue, all of it, you saw that happening. And then somewhere in the sort of post-oil, and that's where I put my mark, post-oil from onwards, we have seen a decline in all of those traits. And I don't know how to explain what oil has got to do with it. But I think the rentier behavior of the political class dramatically over time. And so I don't know I don't feel that we have enough, we used to have enough Democrats in the system, and we have less of them, and I don't know what has happened to them. And I think oil has got something to do with it. I wanted to see whether you have any thoughts on that.
Any of the MPs we have in here would want to respond to what you think is probably happening. Maybe you could just share what do you think is happening?
Oh, okay. I'm actually here principally to congratulate CDD. I don't want to speak for the first generation politicians. I had 2 programs this evening, but I decided that I should come here. Because it's like yesterday, this 25 years ago, we were all going to IEA from number 94. Then suddenly the 2 profs, those days it was Dr. Jima Brody and Dr. There were no professors then. Then this CDD thing started. And my sister, it was good.
There were a lot of seminars. Some of us were recruited from Parliament generally. Were there, and like he said, seminars, CDD. We were not asking for TNT too much, just a little, and all that. And for them to sustain this up to this time, 25 years, I think they are worth commending. A number of new issues have come up, particularly about constitutional amendments. I had the privilege to be in the consultative assembly. And I think that when people are also talking about this, as Madam's committee has done, you have to go back to the discussions that informed some of the articles and so on and so. And it was known then that by all means there will be amendments. So procedures certainly were provided for amendment, because some of the, we just said that when Parliament comes, the Parliament could finish the discussions, particularly about dual nationality and all those. Some of us also had the privilege of being in the early, so see how we could practice it. It is true that after certainly there should be amendments. So CDD, please pay a lot more attention also to this. The process started. Professor Mills started it. John Mahama came and even did a white paper, and for 7 years it stalled. If we had continued from there, do we need to a white paper? In any case, if we did a white paper and some other things were going to be added, then 1 year to the end of some term, some committee was formed in the office of the leader of Parliament, because me and him, we realized that something has to be done. You slow down, something has to be done. That's how come it's a good idea. It's a good, at least some discussions have come up again. But it got stalled entirely. Even things that we all agreed on, there shouldn't be a member of Parliament and be in government. We agreed on it, but from the very beginning we realized that it didn't work. And it worsened at a point. So if somebody decides to form 120 people ministers, 60 come from Parliament, and they are all in cabinet, the definition that was given that cabinet should be 10 to 19, we have ignored it. All of us have ignored it, so you can have 60 people attending cabinet. These are some low-hanging fruits that we should all have agreed. I say we have had our own problems. Prof Audrey knows that we had problems at a point, but she led a powerful delegation. And when I say we, she knows the we that I'm referring to. You also know, Prof, you also know. But it led some powerful delegations, and we at least now everything is okay. CDD should please take this constitutional thing. Professor Prempa, I can see you there. And let's really sort. There's an agreement on a number of issues. For 25 ministers against 106 ministers, we will have to talk about it and all that. But CDD, I like to charge CDD to go beyond the politicians and take up some of the. Let's see how it goes. Very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Spoken like a true politician. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, NCC Chair, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening.
First, I'd like to commend CDD on 25 years of spectacular work in nation building and totally unmatched in the current dispensation in which we find ourselves. I'd like to throw a question, though, to the current management and staff to tell us what the next 25 years will look like. The world has changed. The kind of people who formed the population for this 30 years of the Republic are not the same kind of people that we have today. Apart from that, the demographics have changed as well. We have a youth bulge. We have young people who are not burdened with experience of the past and knowledge of things that have happened because, of course, we don't document our history. So the challenges moving forward for the next 25 years, I suspect, will be very different. And I'd like to know how CDD is positioning itself to meet these challenges. And because the nation building agenda is actually going to get more difficult in the next 25 years, the way I see it. So what are some of the things that you're planning to do to ensure that CDD is still around 25 years from today and has contributed even more to ensuring that our democracy is alive and is thriving and is delivering the goods that it's promised to a generation that did not start this journey with you? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to add to that, we would get a response, if not from any of the panelists, at least from some of our CDD chiefs here. I know a group of young people who vote, but they make sure that they don't vote for MPP or NDC. They intentionally vote for the least qualified person on the ballot. And that's a protest vote. And so the question about our young people and their disillusionment with democracy is real. And so what is CDD's plan going forward, looking at this group in particular? Mr. Executive Director, Prof. The board has charged the management, please.
By the way, party used to belong to people.
Yes.
Do not declare your interest.
Talking about nurturing leaders. Yes. So, Prof, over to you, please.
Hello. No, so CDD will be more AI. Right? We'll be using more artificial intelligence in keeping with the times. But of course, we are incidentally, we are middle of for the medium term. And we've done some internal self-reflection. We've had conversations with various stakeholders and audiences to get input, perspectives from them about our work. And I think one of the we got at the beginning of this reflection, looking back at our last 25 years, is that we have expended substantial resources in the last 25 years looking at the state half of democracy, trying to influence, modify, affect the behavior of state actors and institutions and the human agents in those places. And it's not as though we've taken for granted the society part of it, right? We didn't entirely forget the society part of it, but I think in terms of balance, we focused, I think, disproportionately on the state half of the equation and didn't attend sufficiently to the society part of it, the people part of it, so the demand side of things. So I think for the next at least medium term of our strategy, we will be looking more at the society challenges, the challenges from the people, from us. You know, how are we as a people helping to nurture our democracy? Why is demand so low for accountability? Why is it that the people themselves, who in a democracy are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the democracy, sometimes almost are in bed with their for lack of a better word, hostage takers, right? Right? Oppressors, you might say, right? So we are going to be doing more of that kind of, which we politics, doing a lot more democracy education, dealing with a different generation, a different cohort of the population, more students. We were just even talking today when we entered here that perhaps in the future we shouldn't be this at the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. We should be going to UPSA Auditorium or Legon or Accra Technical University, where really the audience that we want to appeal to and talk to and influence into the future would be, as opposed to coming here where the average young person probably will have to expend some resources to get here. Right? So that kind of orientation is what we're looking at into the future. But I think definitely we take this as a long-term project. I mean, democracy is definitely a long-term project. We expect to be around the next 25 years and beyond. Definitely, we are also interested in transition issues, leadership transition, succession planning. Now, some of them are trade secrets, so I can't tell you all of them. We are working on a number of things internally, but definitely we are going to be making sure that we nurture a new generation of democracy activists. That's one of the big things that we're looking forward to. We have projects in that direction. Some of them in West Africa we just concluded, or at the end about concluding a short program we did about called Next Gen, just growing the next generation, finding the next generation of leaders for civil society in the democratic space. So that kind of work, building continuity into the future, is what we'll be looking more at. So we take on board all the reflections, all the criticism. It's really very helpful for us, including the part about resources and how we indigenize fundraising. It is a big issue for us. If we had our own way, Ghanaians would be the ones who would provide the almost like the 80% of the resources for our work. But in 25 years, we have had only 2 individual Ghanaians give us money. One of them, based in the US, whenever he comes to town, he shows up in the office, signs a check for maybe $200-300 and gives it to us, or he gives us cash. The other person came into the office once and just gave us a check for 2,000 or 3,000 cedis. So these are the only 2 people who have ever given us money. We have convened meetings with private sector, if I should disclose. We have made efforts, actually. Kojo has been our liaison with private sector. We have had breakfast meetings at our own expense, inviting private sector people, industry, services, oil and gas, name it, sit down and have a conversation about funding, not just CDD. And we have not made it about funding CDD. We have actually also, sometimes when it's become difficult, funding civil society and governance work generally. We've mentioned Star Ghana behind your back. We've said, you can actually even throw your money into a basket. If you want anonymity, you don't want to be seen to be backing CDD because you think we're doing too much political work and you don't want the blowback from that, don't worry about it. Give it to Star Ghana. We've had these meetings more than once with champions of industry. It hasn't yielded, it hasn't borne fruit yet. But I think basically we are going to be working on those kinds of issues. We are very keen to get Ghanaians to be the main backers of civil society in Ghana. And so long term, I think among the things we will do in collaboration with civil society resources like Star Ghana and WAXT will be how do we indigenize fundraising and support for civil society. Because if this project works, it works for us. It's for Ghanaians, including the business sector, and especially the business sector. If this place is peaceful, if elections go well, if we do things, everything works well, governance is working, they are the ones who are making the money. They are the ones whose balance sheets and income statements are looking good. So they should be the ones who should be helping support this. So those are some of the things that I think we will be doing. So thanks for the insights that
Thank you very much, Prof. And I didn't warn him, but I think I would like to hear the voice of Professor Jima Bwedi, just to give a few remarks. to close us. We'll be closing, just to say something, to speak, because I really want to hear. You have been really part of this and really driven this, and it will be great to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. But Professor Bafwa Jimandua is a little bit older than I am. And since he has invoked African traditions and implored us to respect and to try to adopt and live by African traditional standards, I cannot contradict him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jimabwedi. On that note, can we all give ourselves a round of applause, please? We want to thank you all. I think, Prof. Prempe, as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, you've just confirmed again why I like CDD-Ghana. Yeah, the indigenous fundraising is one of the things on my heart, really. I think we have to do a lot of work around that. So CDD, I think your work is cut out for you. It's been said that your work will never end. And it will never end, but then there must be innovation. Even as we have an evolving context, CDD must also evolve and make sure that we respond to the needs of Ghana, and particularly address our democratic development issues. So thank you very much to our panelists. You've done an amazing job. Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Kwekwa Wotre is still online. Thank you very much. And we would also like to thank you, our wonderful audience, and our esteemed, I didn't want to mention names because I don't want to miss anybody. I see some really honorable people in our midst, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, eminent persons in our society. I don't want to mention names. I won't even start so that I don't miss anybody. But thank you. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for making the time. I think we will now have some refreshments.